Welcome back to Meidas Defense. I'm your host, Joe Plenzler. A few weeks ago, we had Andy Weber on the show to talk about non-proliferation, about getting bad things off the battlefield and removing the weapons we all wish we could uninvent. But what happens when you have to operate within those shadows? Today, we're sitting down with someone who spent his entire career in that world of clandestine services. My guest is Ralph Goff, a 35-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency and a 6-time station chief. He's an old-school Russia expert whose career spans from the heights of the Cold War to the war on terror and now into the modern era of great power competition. Lately, Ralph has been traveling back and forth to Ukraine, looking at the raw ground truth of the shifting global landscape. We had an incredible, wide-ranging conversation on the show, and today we're pulled from 4 of the most vital segments from that briefing. We're going to look at why this war isn't just a historic turf battle, the dark economic reality of who's actually volunteering to fight for Putin, and how autonomous drone swarms are creating a steampunk battlefield the West isn't ready for, and finally, the strategic scorecard of the conflict in the Persian Gulf. Let's jump right into our first segment. I started the conversation by asking Ralph about his path into the agency and how he views the current state of war in Ukraine. Here's Ralph.
Yeah, Joe, good question. I'm an old Russia guy, right? So it goes back. I'm 67 now. I go all the way back to when I was 18 years old. The Cold War, been through, several phases. You had the Cold War, the end of the Cold War, the war on terror, or as Borat calls it, the war of terror. Then, this great power competition that we're in now in a unipolar superpower war where the U.S. was king. Now we're in this multipolar world of different power centers, right? And the Ukraine war fits in the middle of this. The war in Ukraine is not just a war between two nation states, Russia and Ukraine. This is a war between two competing value systems. And you see it you look at who's lined up on the sides, right? On Ukraine's side, you have more or less the U.S., you have Europe, right? You have the Western democracies. On the Russian side, you've got North Korea, Iran, right? China lurking in the background, right? These are all autocratic nations. So the real reason is, here you had Ukraine, which has millions of Russian speakers, right? It's a Slavic country. They're very closely related to the Russians. They aren't the same as the Russians. Putin would have us believe they're all one people. Pretty bizarre way of showing your respect for your own people by killing them. But, he watched as Ukraine started to reorient itself to the West, right? Economically, they want to join the EU. Politically, they want to join the EU, right? Militarily, yes, they did want NATO. They wanted NATO membership because, they were afraid of Russia. But, here was a country beginning to orient itself to the West, has millions of Russian speakers in it. And what Putin feared most was having a democratic, free, Western-oriented, Russian-speaking country on his border. Because the Russian people would look at that and say, hey, wait, why can't we have that prosperity? Why can't we have those freedoms, right? The Russian people aren't as stupid as we sometimes think. They would look at it, and that would be a threat to Putin's power. Not NATO. It had nothing to do with NATO. It had everything to do with a threat to Putin's hold over the Russian people.
That distinction hits the nail on the head. This isn't about geography or NATO expansion. It's an existential panic inside the Kremlin over the viral nature of freedom. But maintaining that grip on power requires an intense amount of human sacrifice. Right now, Russia is burning through casualties at a staggering rate. Close to 35,000 killed or seriously wounded every single month. To put that in perspective, that means Putin's losing double the troops in 1 month that the entire Soviet Union lost over an entire decade in Afghanistan. So how does the regime survive that kind of bleeding without a revolution? In this next segment, Ralph shatters the myth of the unmotivated chain conscript. He exposes the grim economic lottery pulling volunteers from Russia's impoverished hinterlands and a bizarre domestic phenomenon known as the Black Widows.
The people that are fighting in Russia, the men who are fighting in Russia, these are volunteers who sign up for money. They're paid.
Okay.
Right? These guys are paid. And, they come from the regions, the far-flung regions of Russia, right? Russia is not some sort of homogenous state, right? It's the Russian Federation. And you have a number of these, semi-autonomous states that make up the Russian Federation. And a lot of them aren't even ethnic Russians, right? There's a big difference between being a Russian citizen and being an ethnic Russian, right? there's different words for that. Ruski and Rossiyanya, right? So the vast majority of the guys being volunteering are from these far-flung republics. They're Muslims. They come from Turkic ethnic groups. They come from Asian ethnic groups, right? Bashkiria, Bashkortostan, all these different places, right? And in the one commonality in all these far-flung regions is the poor economic prospects for these guys, right? High unemployment, high rates of alcoholism, high mortality rates, right? The average age, I think, for men out in these places is like in their 50s or 60s, right? It's really dismal, glum areas. And this is where Putin is able to sign up anywhere between 25 and 35,000 men per month, right? From money.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, one of my Ukrainian friends gave me a patch once, and that was taken off of a Russian casualty. And in Russian, it said on it, "Nothing personal. I'm here for the money." So the guy was literally wearing it on his sleeve, right? You know, the Ukrainians have automated a lot of their frontline combat activities with drones, right? Ground drones, land drones, sea drones. And one byproduct, you have two results of that. One is just this incredible lethality on the front, right? Which is why we're seeing 35,000 Russians killed in a month. The other is the Ukrainians are able to reduce the number of their men at the front, right? They can hold the line with fewer men because they're using more, autonomous type weapon systems. And that's huge, because this is the biggest disparity between Russia and Ukraine is the manpower equation, right? Russia has a population of, used to have a population of around 145 million or something like that. They're probably down to about 120 million through the declining birth rates and demographic pressures. Ukraine started out, I think, somewhere around 40 million. They're down into probably the low 30s because of people who've left. And they have a lot of trouble with recruiting, right? The war is a terrible thing. A lot of young Ukrainians are not really that enthusiastic about going to the meat grinder. So, the manpower, there's always manpower pressure on the Ukrainians. Therefore, with the casualties, they try to keep those numbers quiet, but, they have been able to reduce them. It's still horrific. I think they've probably lost, killed, or wounded in a total of like 500,000 men, which is a lot for that,
Yeah, and these things tend to have destabilizing effects on populations, right? So even if Putin's trying to protect his main population areas from feeling the impact of the war to maintain stability, what happens in these hinterlands when all of a sudden, the male-female ratio drops precipitously and there's more women than men? I don't know. I could see how that could become culturally problematic.
Yeah.
What do you see there? Because
there's huge demographic pressures on all sides, right? There's pressures on the Ukrainians, demographic pressures on the Russians, demographic pressure on China, right? With their one-child policy is really going to result in a precipitous decline in the Chinese population that's underway. Yeah. But with Russia, one could say that they're headed to extinction. And you have this situation now where, Russian mail order brides in the Far East are a hot commodity for China, which I'm sure does not play well in Moscow.
Wow.
You also have, rather grimly, this new economic activity in Russia where you have women who are called black widows. These are women who seek out men of military age, right? And they court them. They marry them. They get them to, sign up for the military. These guys go to the front. They're killed. The women cash in on the death benefits, and then they go find another one, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The black widows,
It's a breathtakingly grim game. A little economy built on death. But as the human toll rises, the technology on the front lines is changing at a pace that looks less like traditional doctrine and more like a sci-fi thriller. My co-host Ken Harbaugh recently made a documentary called The Drone Hunters of Kashan. When I watched it, it was clear that the battlefield looks absolutely nothing like what we saw during our infantry days in Iraq or Afghanistan. It's a hyper-lethal landscape of fiber optic wires, automated ground systems, and autonomous drone swarms. In this third segment, Ralph describes what he sees when he travels further into the theater and the internal clash between old school tank commanders and digital ministers, and a stark warning about why the West is fundamentally unprepared for this new style of warfare?
First of all, yes, the nature of warfare is changing, right? And Russia and Ukraine are fighting a type of warfare that's never been fought before, right? They are the pioneers in this, and both sides are learning. Both sides are trying to figure this thing out. I don't even think they know where this is really going, right? With this, it remains to be seen where we go with all this semi-autonomy and autonomy that's drones and drone swarms, right? There are big arguments now, even within the command structures of both sides, right? And on the Ukrainian side, you've got kind of a split between the old style military guys with tanks and artillery and conventional infantry, right? And then you got these new guys with their drones, right? For instance, Minister Fyodorov, the relatively new defense minister of Ukraine. Before this, he was the minister of digital transformation, right? So this is a guy.
Oh, wow.
He's all in on drones. Then you have General Syrskyi, the commander in chief of the ground forces or the defense forces of Ukraine. And he's a tanks and artillery guy, right? So these guys are kind of butting heads over, what do we do with these tanks and artillery? And this is where the U.S. comes in. We're not ready for this yet, right? The West is not ready for this new type of warfare that's coming of, drones and drone swarms. And, for instance, I'll give you an example. When I went out to Ukraine last month and, I tend to go in through Poland. It's easier that way. And I was landing, my commercial flight landed down in Krakow, beautiful city in southern Poland. And like many, airports in Eastern Europe, this one has the civilian side is on one side with the terminal and all that, and the other side is the military base. And as we're taxiing down the runway to go over to the civilian side, we pass all these Polish military aircraft that were there on the air base side. And, the airmen were out there servicing the aircraft. Some were getting ready for flight and all right, guys are doing maintenance. And I'm looking at these and I close my eyes for a minute. And I just imagine what would happen if all of a sudden there was a surprise attack by drones. Right.
Yeah.
And I could just see all these aircraft in smoldering piles of debris because there was nothing to protect them. And that kind of, for me, is where the West is right now. Right. We're not ready for this new type of warfare.
It's a chilling realization. A multi-million-dollar jet fighter is wiped out by a $500 drone because our defensive architecture is still built for the last century. And this modern convergence of technology and asymmetric strategy isn't just limited to Europe. It stretches directly to the Persian Gulf. Iranians have spent decades mastering their own version of this, what we call the hedgehog theory. They know they can't win in a conventional symmetric battle against the United States Navy, so they built a strategy centered on absorbing blows and maximizing economic pain at the gas pumps to see who flinches first. For our final segment, Ralph weighs in on the broader strategic scorecard in the Middle East, the shifting dynamics of the Arab allies, and the dangerous lack of strategical structural clarity in American foreign policy.
This conflict between us and them was a race to see whose economy could endure the most pain before the other one gave up, right? I mean, the Trump administration, our military did an excellent job, right? We destroyed their Navy, we destroyed their Air Force, we've reduced their missile forces, right? That's all true. And that's the U.S. military has performed magnificently. But, when it comes to strangling the entire economy, yes, our naval blockade was working well, but at the same time, we were kind of strangling ourselves with the prices of oil. We see now, we've seen gas prices here in the United States go down quite a bit in the last week or so, right? It's astounding, actually. It's still much higher. I think, the administration needs not to fool itself. We Americans, I think sometimes we get fooled, big oil, the prices go up. We get all mad. Oh, we're paying $4.50 a gallon or whatever, right? And then these drop down maybe to, a little bit. Right now they're like $3.80s, $3.90 or something like that. We're all breathing a sigh of relief, but that's still, 50, 60, 70 cents higher than we paid before the war started, right? So, I don't think we'll ever see prices go back down to where they were before, right? And we'll take a hit in the pocketbook. And, I think for many American voters, the pain point has been reached, and the Iranians are well aware of that, and they'll keep using that weapon as these negotiations proceed.
Yeah. And will the Israelis cooperate? I don't know. What was interesting is we didn't see the Houthis really kind of ramp up in the Strait of Tirs to block that choke point, right? I mean, they could have done that. And the Iranian target selection has been really interesting. Like, we didn't see a swarm attack really on any of our naval vessels. There's no U.S. Navy warships sitting on the bottom of the ocean. They didn't do a whole lot of cyber attacks against U.S. banking, oil, water, infrastructure. No terrorist attacks. They've been really careful, like knowing the war is unpopular, not to go after things that would tip U.S. public sentiment in favor, right, of the war.
Yeah. They seem to save their worst attacks for like the Emirates and the Qataris and some of the, and the Saudis, right? They made some very strong statements of like, okay, if you guys want to do this, we're going to do this the hard way, right? And it worked. I mean, the Qataris were seeking separate negotiations. The Saudis were trying to stay out of it, right? The Emiratis, they reacted differently. They launched a lot of attacks on their own. So, there were a lot of competing priorities playing out in this scenario.
When you look at the war with Iran, how are you measuring this? Like, what's on your scorecard in terms of strategic wins and losses here?
So, unfortunately, the scorecards are muddled because the administration keeps changing its position as to why we went to war in the first place, right? Regime change, not regime change. Prevent acquisition of a nuclear weapon. Now we're going to negotiate that. Are we back to the old JCPOA days, right? So there's a lack of clarity on what the real essential objectives of this military operation were. And when you're basing troops in a region, one of the things that allows you to have troops based in a region is you have some sort of strategic cohesion with your allies and your hosts.
Right.
And I see that fraying, and that is a danger in the future, that it will fray further and will have a negative impact on the ability of the United States to project power in that region.
Yeah, we've been kicked out of places before. Clark Air Force Base, Keflavik is another one, right? Where we used to have many more bases around where we could project power from, and those relationships soured and it's limited ours.
We've proven that we can project power from the homeland. I mean, you look at like one of the reasons why these B-2 strikes. I mean, these guys flew direct from the United States to bomb Iran and then back. So with our mid-air refueling capabilities and long-range weapon systems and all, we can project power. But you still need to be able to have a footprint in the region where you're fighting, and that could be threatened by how this all turns out.
A lack of clarity on our essential objectives. As a former military guy myself, that line hits hard. If we're going to send our young men and women into harm's way, we owe them a crystal clear destination. Whether we are analyzing a trench in the Donbass, a drone component supply chain tracing back to China, or a freight alliance in the Middle East, Ralph's insights remind us of a fundamental truth. Warfare is evolving faster than our bureaucracy's ability to comprehend it. The nation that adapts its technology, clarifies its strategy, and steals its structural resolve is the one that will secure the future. I want to give a massive thank you to Ralph Gall for sitting down with us, stepping outside the sanitized headlines, and giving us the unvarnished truth. And thank you for listening to Meidas Defense Podcast. If you want to keep tracking these national security issues, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave us a 5-star review, share this episode with a friend. You can follow me at Joe Plenzler on Substack. You can follow the entire interview on Substack on Meidas Plus. And until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and we'll see you back here next week.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filikowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.